Awesome. So kia ora, I'm Danielle, one of the systems strategists at the Impact Collective, and we also have Briar, who is another systems strategist at the Impact Collective on the line. And this week, for our podcast series, we've gone online because one of our members isn't able to be with us in person, but we are very honoured for our Gender Equality Week to have two members of the Rural Women's Network on the line. So I'll hand over to you guys to introduce yourselves and what you do in terms of, I guess, your broader lifestyles, but also the Rural Women's Network yourself. So take us away, Angela.
Kia ora, ko Angela McLeod aho. I'm the policy manager at Rural Women New Zealand National Office. So my role there is to support the creation of our public policy and to articulate that public policy. So that could be in select committee, basically government relations, but also in relationship with other stakeholders in our organisation. I'm coming up 4 years at Rural Women New Zealand. I have a background in the NGO space. I've been president of women's organisations and also have worked in Parliament and in a comms kind of policy research space. So yeah, I come to Rural Women with quite a broad background. And a farm girl. I grew up on a farm and I have a degree in agriculture from Massey University. So it's quite good. But Leanora is one of our members, and Leanora, your turn. You have the floor.
Right, well, I'm Leanora Spark. I am a branch member of Port Elmangamahu branch. I joined back in 1996 when we first moved to the Wanganui area. I've had various office positions within the branch, but we are definitely, unlike Angela, I'm way down. I'm much more at grassroots level.
That's the important place to play, though, right?
Yeah, I'm very,
not
very
saying not important, Angela.
very, very involved with our community, involved with dog trials and on the hall committee. Everyone has to do the hall committee and that sort of thing. So I know our community fairly well. I also happen to be the rural postie out there, so pretty broad range, as I say, at grassroots level.
Yeah, we actually discovered this morning that she's our postie in Port El. Who would have thought?
She didn't even recognise me. I saw her about 2 days ago.
She comes at about 7 a.m. in the morning, to be fair, so not switched on. Oh, awesome. So I guess so obviously this week we're focusing on SDG 5, so gender equality, so very sort of timely that we're talking to you both. So perhaps do you want to sort of kick us off and one of you or both of you sort of chat us through, I guess, the formation of the Rural Women's Network, its kaupapa, what it's all about?
Sure. So Rural Women New Zealand started in about 1925, and back then it was called the Women's Division of the Farmers Union, and it was a group of women who had been travelling to Wellington with their husbands who were members of the Farmers Union, and figuring out that they actually, had their own challenges, I guess, in the rural communities and could see some solutions. So they got themselves together into a group, and that then became Women's Division of Federated Farmers, and then we changed into our name to Rural Women New Zealand in the 1990s. Leanora might remember that more. So basically, we were set up to support families in the rural communities, and one of the first things that we did was it was called, I think, the Bush Nurse Service. So it was around supporting, families with their newborns and spending a couple of weeks with the family, helping them, look after that newborn, but also, carry on doing their everyday, I guess, rural life. So, and that, of course, grew into Access Home Health Care, which was recently sold. But that's essentially, the kaupapa. Our kaupapa is supporting and connecting people and communities, and that's where it started.
And from there, I can only speak, of course, from the Wanganui angle, which actually was where rural or women's division first started. As it sort of progressed a bit, as roads got a little bit better and women were actually able to make it to town, they would go to town. All of Wanganui area did a lot of fundraising. They actually bought a house in Wanganui where these women, when they were going to town for the day, they could go and get changed out of their dusty old clothes from travelling on the roads. It was somewhere they could take their children to change them. It was somewhere where they could have a bit of a lie down or a cup of tea. So they were always looking after their women. That house has now since been sold because, of course, we don't get dusty coming to town anymore, theoretically.
Yeah. Sure, for sure. And I guess like being a rural woman, recently rural woman myself in the Fordale area, there's sort of some core needs you're talking about there, addressing, I guess, you know, in families and having a newborn, and admittedly sort of being a very active rural woman on the farm. You know, it's just, I know I experience, so working in town, I get home and then I'm working on the farm. It's almost like having a second job, right? So is it sort of a mix of covering the needs of, I guess, women that are full-time on the farm, women that are mums, women that are working double jobs? Like what are some of the sort of core needs that you're really trying to address within that?
For us, especially at national level, I guess it's around the inaccessibility or inequality of accessibility to services. So it might be the fact that there's only one midwife for the whole of the East Cape. You know, there's 2 midwives in Central Otago, that kind of thing. You know, there are midwives having to travel an hour each way to go and visit their mums-to-be. There's a lack of access to technology. You know, rural New Zealand doesn't have, you know, access to the internet or cellular coverage. There's issues with distance from cancer treatments, hospitals, GPs, dentists, all of those health professionals. There's issues in the education for children in remote and isolated areas. You know, they need to travel to go to school. So therefore there is, you know, the costs associated with that. There is also things, I mean, Leanora will be able to talk about some local challenges, but there are things in the environment space at the moment. You know, there is a lot happening for New Zealand there, and so there's quite a few challenges for rural communities in that space. Leanora might have, do you have some local examples of some challenges?
I think what I see out where I am, because I do go way out into the sticks, a lot of the farms out that way now seem to get one farmer buying up a lot of farms around them, and they've also become very mechanised. So there are a lot of empty workers' cottages. They don't require the number of workers anymore because the machinery is doing it for them. So therefore you do get little pods of people that are very, very remote, and they might have the men all out working, and there is nothing there for them, really. There isn't the support necessarily, because there used to be clusters of people. Now this doesn't seem to be quite like that anymore. That's probably about the main thing that I've noticed as far as that goes. Although, having said that, of course, roads are better.
And I think the other thing that's really interesting is that rural women are quite entrepreneurial. And you know, one of the big pieces of celebration work, I guess, that Rural Women New Zealand has been doing. I think it's been going about 14 to 15 years now, is the NZI Rural Women Business Awards. And so they are for women-owned and managed businesses in rural New Zealand, or rural businesses. And there's some fantastic stuff. There's Bridget Canning, who's based in the Wairarapa, who has a company that provides internet services for people, because the big telcos don't have that local knowledge or local tech infrastructure that she's able to put in. Their Agrasea, is a company that makes fertilizers out of seaweed and other things. There's Mari Taylor, who's based in the Hawke's Bay, who grows native trees and has been involved with planting them throughout the Hawke's Bay. So there's all sorts of things where women have found themselves on farms or have grown up on farms and needed either for these challenges to be able to supplement the income, or be able to do something with the skills if they've moved on farm. And so, there's even a gym instructor, a personal trainer who was a finalist in last year's awards, I think, based on farm. So, and there's ways, of course, we need technology for it to work for lots of those, but, we've come up with some pretty cool stuff.
We actually, on that, just last week or the week before, we had one of our monthly get-togethers, and we try to get a speaker for most of these meetings that we have. And we managed to get Lynn Neeson, who was one of our Business Award winners, and she now actually sponsors one of the categories herself. But she started off making wool blankets with wool off the farm. Yep. But making sure that the wool didn't get sent out of the country to be made up into the actual blankets. All the manufacture, everything is all totally New Zealand. And she was fabulous to listen to, really inspirational. It was a good night. But yeah, there are lots of those, but there is also that like women going out to work and then coming home. Hubbies are working very, very late, and with all this added stress, with all these water things, we won't go too far into that. They are finding that if they want to see their husbands, they have to go out and work on the farm to be with their husband. It's the only way that they're going to get to see them.
Yep. And weekends.
And weekends. Yes, you'll be finding that out for yourself.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess in our mahi, in terms of the Impact Collective, initially, I guess we're kind of covering the Wanganui, Rangitikei, Ruapehu and South Taranaki areas, and a big part of what we're trying to do is sort of gather the stories and understand what it's actually like in terms of those lived experiences. And it may be a bit of a tricky question, but I guess in terms of the local Fordell one, and I guess your knowledge, Angela, of I guess across the networks, one core thing we're trying to do is identify, I guess, where strengths are. I think you've spoken to a few in terms of that entrepreneurial mindset, like women that are getting really active and using their skill sets if they are based on farm. But are there any, I guess, sort of opportunities or areas that are really sticking out at the moment, or stories that you've heard through the network of areas that there are opportunities, or I guess blind spots where there could be the opportunity to kind of create some impact?
Mm-hmm. Well, from what I see out actually on the farms, there seems to be a great deal of gender equality. I think, and also from the dog trial aspect, I've been involved with them for the last 18 years as well. And when it comes to female shepherds, very, very well represented. They do very well. They do very well at dog trialing. I was listening on to the country program on the radio the other day, and some chap mentioned he had been at the groundswell protest in Taihape, and he mentioned the number of like really large machinery, big tractors, and he said majority of them were being driven by women.
Yeah.
Which is really good to see. I love it when you see these monster machines out there in the paddock. Next thing, this dinky little female comes to it is really cool. And we've also had over the last 8 years, I suppose, maybe, we've had two really unfortunately and not foreseen, where a couple of our fabulous men have died unexpectedly. Big farms, and their wives have had to step up, and their daughters, and they're running the farms now. They've was sort of forced into that, but they've done it, and they're doing it, and they're doing really, really well. So I think, yeah, sort of right down at ground level, I think there is gender equality. I think that the women are managing really, really well.
And do you think, I guess, like in digging into that a little bit, like what's sort of contributing to that? Do you think it's kind of coming from both sides in terms of women wanting to be more empowered and wanting to do more? But I guess if we talk about kind of the husbands or the male sort of dynamic in that, do you think they're being more open or more accepting of their female counterparts, kind of branching out and taking on more in that regard? Like in terms of, I guess, if we think of the traditional sense of a farmer's wife, do you feel like that's really sort of evolving and the men are actually playing quite a positive role in that?
From what I see, it seems to be, yeah, a lot of the women, I don't know, yeah.
It's an interesting one, Leanora, because because at my level, I guess, and what I'm seeing, we've just done a survey and we've got a report on the workforce in the future of food and fibre production. And yes, there are a lot more women involved, and yes, it's becoming more acceptable, if that's the term to use, from across the sector. There are still women finding it difficult. There are still women that head along to the field days, and they are actually, like Leanora's saying, they're running the farm. And some of them even go along with their husbands, and their husbands have nothing to do with the farm, but the salespeople or the people involved in those places at field days go straight away to him. And so there is still that aspect. It's not nearly as much as it was 30 years ago or 15 years ago. So I think alongside all of the other good things happening to reduce gender inequality is also filtering on farm. There's definitely not enough women in agribusiness leadership roles. The whole thing too with our apart from celebrating the innovation and entrepreneurship of rural women, these awards, the NZI Rural Women New Zealand Business Awards, are also showcasing these women business owners and women business leaders. So that's a good thing to help shift the number of women that are in those CE board chair roles. Yeah. So it's good. Leanora's right, but there's still some work to do.
Yes, I agree with that one.
And what would be sort of the core, I guess, barriers or things that are getting in the way of women getting into those positions, would you say?
Okay, well, our research has shown us that it's working conditions and pay is a bit of a barrier. Another barrier is attitude. So, lots of people need to change their attitude towards women working in the primary sector, or at least giving them a go. I think it's a generational change too. I mean, Leanora, what age are the shepherds now? You know, at the dog trialing, are they your age and my age, or are they Danielle's age? You know, are they?
Yeah, obviously the new ones coming in are Danielle's age. There's always been a hardcore of women trialing, but it's just the numbers now are really increasing. I mean, recently we had a young 13-year-old girl take out some championships, and it was good to see her in the paddock standing next to these gnarly old guys that have been doing it for years and years and years. And there's this little 13-year-old chickie with a dog that Dad gave her, and just absolutely nailing it. It's good.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether some of the change in this season too could be COVID related in a good way. So, you know, there are less workers being able to come in from overseas, and more women have been affected with the lockdown from an employment point of view than men. I mean, colossal difference. I wonder whether many of them are working on farm now. I wonder whether that's the case when Leanora's saying there's all these women in these big tractors. Maybe they're doing that, you know, out of necessity. And I would think that actually women tend to be the innovators out of necessity. And there is that saying, isn't there? Necessity is the mother of invention. So you know, I wonder. I mean, I don't know. I'm just musing because I don't have any research to back it up, but I suspect that there could be some of that.
Yeah, and I guess even those that are keeping their jobs are working from home, you know, and there is more flexibility, I guess, to kind of pop out and help out in the yards in their lunch break, or, you know, like flex it a little bit more and be a bit more involved. Totally.
Yeah, once again, I must say, in my area, most of the people that do, or it seems to be, large majority of the people that are travelling into town for work are essential workers. We've got a lot of nurses and midwives and people that are still travelling and doing what they've always done. For a lot of people, it hasn't changed.
Yeah.
I always say once you get past Fordell, there is no change. The farmers are all still working, and it's all just the same.
Yeah, for sure.
And the other thing, when you were asking before about barriers to women, one of them is childcare. So, you know, families have changed and communities have changed a lot. Like Leanora was saying, you know, all those little communities, little pockets of people, and now because there are bigger farms, there's less people. There's also less support networks for women with young children. And so it's not necessarily the fact that actually they want to go into town and work. It's just that in order to be able to work on farm, there's not always those options of having grandparents or uncles and aunties close by, you know, to look after the children while they go and work in the wool shed. I mean, I know when I was a kid, apparently, stories are that because we had a dairy farm, Mum and Dad would pop us in the milk cans, you know, and sit there, you know, like this, looking at what was going on, and you're safe as houses because you can't get out and you can't roll the thing over. But you know, I think that we've heard some of those awful tragedies of children on farm, and it's because they need to be there, because you know there is no other option for families but to have their children alongside them, which is an absolute learning. The capacity for learning stuff and the opportunity for learning is phenomenal, but there's also, you know, that whole kind of safety to it. And a lot of women, in fact, I was in a meeting last night where one of our board members was saying just that, you know, childcare is one of the biggest issues, and it's not even the cost, it's because it's just not even available.
Yeah. Totally. And is that, I guess, having flow down effects? Because obviously there's incredible education opportunities being on farm for children, but there's that kind of basic numeracy, literacy, I guess, kind of building of more classroom type or daycare type environment learning, is that being impacted by that? Or I guess socialization with other kids?
It's probably more that, I mean, I don't, Leanora might have a different view. I mean, when I was younger, we never had kindy or play centre or child, you know, our first experience was school at age 5 when you got on the bus and you went to school. I don't think, but yeah, I think it's that learning together. And with those small communities back then, there were lots of children of a similar age. And so you kind of had that when you had gatherings. But I don't know, Leanora, what do you think?
Things have changed out at the more distant school where I go. When we first moved there in '96, there were 35 children at the school. Now there are 4. And they're all under the age of about 8 or 9, I think. The next ones, of course, have travelled. They were bored for high school. So the babysitters are not there. You know, we've got this younger crew coming through now and quite a number of young mothers. And of course, they're trying to get a bit of a social aspect going out there. We're trying to utilise the hall a bit more often and that sort of thing. And of course, when they're trying to organise something, the call goes up, who's got a babysitter? Because the babysitters are all out and they're either at high school or else they leave and go to university. And so there's that gap. There's that big gap. So we've got these 4 kids at school. Really fortunate with that school in that where it's placed, there's a geographical barrier, they say, at one end. So the children can't go that way to another school because the road's too unpredictable. And it's too far for them to travel to the next one. So that school, as long as they can still scrape together enough people to keep the board going, that school will keep going. So they're lucky with that. But it's the teeth type thing.
And
that is a challenge we're finding, Danielle, is that, you know, because what happens is the Ministry of Education, the school gets to a certain number, and it's just not. Well, they're not saying it's viable when actually it's the centre of the community.
Yeah, totally. I was going to comment that I assume that, you know, the staff at the school would be from the rural local community as well. So, you know, that's employment as well that's getting touched on there if it does become unviable.
Yeah, we've got 2.5 staff out there with 4 kids. It's sort of
not a bad ratio.
It's a pretty good ratio. It's really good for the kids, up to a certain extent. But then once they get to sort of 9 or 10, the parents are wanting to take them out and put them in a bigger school where they're going to then learn what it's like to be amongst more people, which is fair.
Do you have any questions, Briar?
It's just about to jump in there. I know I've been fairly quiet. It's from listening, it's just incredible the landscape in which you're working within. Just thinking about all the challenges that you've mentioned, from, you know, farming's becoming mechanised to communities losing scale to, you know, the general perception of women in that type of work, and all around this kind of this lessening of support. I can totally see why your kaupapa is focused on creating community and building support. And I was just really interested in some of the ways in which you go about building support and building community for people through the Rural Women's Network.
Well, what we focus on really is just we have monthly get-togethers. We try to get a speaker, but if we don't have one, it really doesn't matter because we can all talk. Our focus really is just on being together. You know, we always say we talk, we walk, we listen, and we laugh. And we're really good at all those things.
Yeah.
And that's based, I mean, we have things that we do during the year. We do special walk the world things, a big walk that we do. But yeah, the main focus is ringing people up, and social media, all that wonderful, but there is nothing like a phone call and to get somebody off their bums and actually say, oh yeah, maybe I will come. It's yeah, that's I still think that personal touch is definitely the better.
Very human.
Yeah, it is. And Briar, there's some other things happening, or we have done, which talk, that whole connecting thing. So, we had lockdown last year and there were all the essential workers. And one of those it's kind of a joke thing. And some of us kind of think, oh no, not scones. Well, we actually used that. Because, of course, we don't want people thinking, oh, rural women is just tea and scones. But actually, we used it to celebrate those essential workers. So, there's nothing better than a morning tea, right? Somebody get morning tea shout. And so that's what we did. So we had, members all across the country doing this, and they would prepare morning tea and take it to the fire station, the police station, the local supermarket, all those people that were working through that time. And we did it at National as well. In Wellington, we held a morning tea. So, providing cakes and biscuits and things. And we invited those essential workers to send people. So we had 2 from Wellington Free Ambulance. We had 2 come from St John's. We had them come from Countdown, from New World. We had a whole room for morning tea, to thank them for looking after us and holding the communities together through that lockdown. So we do kind of use those things. And the other one, which Leanora's, because she's in what we call Region 4. So all the Rural Women New Zealand members got together and they baked fruitcakes. And those fruitcakes were sent to the families down in Canterbury who were affected by the floods. So
not long before that, we had done the same thing in Region 4, where we had all made the fruitcakes and sent it over to the Hawke's Bay for the drought.
Yeah.
Global warming, it's it was the drought and then it was the flood. Yeah. But on that morning tea, I have to admit, I was actually the recipient of one of those morning teas, and just to show how thick I can be, I turned up, I've got a little office at the back of the Mangamahu Hall, where I sort mail out there to give me a break from the car. And I saw a couple of our rural women out there, and I said to them, oh, what are you guys doing out here? You lost. and this, oh, no, I just thought I'd show Lois around a little bit. And and then I said, oh, all right. And then another one turned up and she said, oh, desperate for the loo. Is there a toilet in here? I said, there's a toilet in here. And these women are all turning, and I was still way over my head. And it wasn't until about the 5th or 6th person turned up and they started pulling all the food out of the car. Oh.
Oh, yeah,
it was really cool, actually. It was quite neat.
That was incredibly beautiful, and just the fact that you didn't even notice, it just probably made it all that much more of a surprise when you actually saw the food coming out. I can imagine.
It did. I thought it was weird that they were all sort of happened to be there at the same time.
A sign of fate, who knows?
Yeah. Strange things happen in the country.
Oh dear.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, that, as you say, Bright, it's kind of beautiful, and also the fact that, like, traditionally, I guess, like, farmers' wives, like, you bake the scones, you provide kai, that's the role of the farmers' wives. And it's like, in terms of, I guess, becoming more equal, it's not that you're forgetting those things, you're actually kind of celebrating those things and kind of putting them to good use and good cause. So it's like, you're not kind of going from this to that, it's just about sort of growing, would you say?
Yep,
yeah.
every one of our get-togethers is always plenty of good food.
And I think the other thing that I would say from a policy perspective, and especially if we're talking about, the SDGs and SDG 5, is when our women get together over copious amounts of food, or good food, you said, didn't it? Good food. They talk. And so that's one of those really important things from a mental health and wellbeing space, but also about the challenges facing them. So at the grassroots level, we will have branches and members coming to us at National Office to say, we're noticing these people are struggling, they don't have a cellular coverage, for example. And there is a formal way of bringing that through what we call a remit, but there's also just having that conversation and answering our surveys so that we can then seek change or influence the decision makers to get change in order to support and connect those communities. So it's actually a really important part of the organisation seeking change, is that getting together, talking, sharing, kind of like, I suppose, in formal talk, you would say escalating it. But
yeah. Absolutely.
And being based around Kai, that in itself is, the driver of that conversation. It's the safe space. We're here together creating that place, and so we can have that corridor with one another around what's happening for us. And I think that's creating that space for everyone, and it's just beautiful, yeah.
Yeah, totally. Conscious of time a little bit because I know that you have an appointment. Are there any? This has been such valuable and awesome corridor. I'm sure we could talk all day as us women can. Are there any sort of, I guess, in the landscape of, I guess, everything where I guess we as the Impact Collective are trying to kind of, I guess, gain knowledge and gain intelligence on, but I guess more focused in terms of gender equality, and particularly around your kaupapa. Are there any sort of final ending remarks or thoughts, or I guess challenges to our viewers or people or us as the Impact Collective?
well, I think the challenge is a rural lens. And the challenge is also a gender lens. So where people are watching or thinking about the work that they do, or whoever is the listeners and the watchers of these podcasts, what is it that they do in their day where they're making decisions that could possibly impact on rural communities? And therefore, if they were to change something or to involve somebody, what would that look like? And it's just actually thinking about that from those perspectives. And it might be that they need to find somebody to talk to with that lived experience or with that knowledge around, rural communities, rural living, being a woman in rural New Zealand, those sorts of things. I think that would be my challenge to people, is when they go to make a decision on a plan or a process or a good or a service, or a product, how will that impact a rural community?
Yes, I feel I feel you would need a lot more like local knowledge. It's the things that happen at the grassroots, like dreadful accidents. That people have to try. I mean, life-changing. Some of the things that happen are absolutely, truly life-changing. Yep. And we, fortunately, with my job, I am sort of hands-on with that sort of thing. I'm aware of what's happening. And we've been able to put together a few packages, just our branch, for people that are going through something like this. They may be people that are new in the district, they may be people that are new in the country and don't have a huge support network around them. But we will go with a care package, we call it, and give it to them and just say, look, you know, we know we can't change what's happened, and there's not a hell of a lot that we can do, but we're here and we're thinking of you. You're not alone. Yeah. And it's awesome to be able to do that sort of thing. But I think that for people with what you're trying to do, you really need to be able to have some more input right down at that local level. It's all, you know, like federated farmers are great, but they tend to speak at a higher level, and it's getting to know what's going on in the individual places.
Yeah, totally. I guess in that's, you know, like as the Impact Collective, we're measuring right down to an SA2 level. So that's a per 1,000 person population, right? In terms of the data, and something that Briar and I are embarking on now between ourselves is how do we gather as many stories as we can at as far down we can, which is a huge challenge with just two of us. We've got many sessions to book. But yeah, I guess it's like, have you, I guess, in your work found sort of, obviously we're aware that it's a snowball effect, right? So once you get some people talking, they'll let auntie know, or they'll let, you know, uncle know that they should, and then they'll be on the phone, and it kind of starts to kind of evolve in this way. But how do you kind of harness that true power of that, I guess, collective ongoing sharing of those lived experiences?
I would recommend reaching out to your rural posties. I think if anyone knows what's going on out there, it's your rural postie. They're there through thick and thin. Yeah. They are always there. If there is a slip and you can't get through, there was one case when I was unable to get through to the end of my valley for about 3 or 4 weeks. And when I finally did get through, they were so pleased to see my little flashing light. Here comes Leanora. So reach out to your rural posties. Yeah. They know what's going on.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah, through everything. I'd say they are very valuable when it comes to information collecting.
Yeah. And the other group of people are livestock agents. Yes. And that go on farm, vets. And vets. Because they are, you know, talking to people. I mean, not as regular as a postie, but you know, they're in regular contact with farming families. That's another option.
Amazing.
I think the thing with it is that I think we're in a good space. I think rural New Zealand is actually, you know, despite what some of the media thinks, I actually think we're in a good space. And the prices are okay at the moment, you know, those sorts of things. And I think because rural communities are used to being kind of in an isolated world, and I don't mean like isolated. So lockdown was not, you know, as big a challenge for rural communities as it might have been in urban, because they're used to being, you know, it just so happens that the children were home for 4 weeks, and you know, but a lot of some of the rural school principals I've been speaking to have said things like they didn't expect the children to do all of the schoolwork, but they expected them to be involved with their families out on farm and still learning stuff. I mean, you were saying before about numeracy. Well, you can count the sheep in that pen.
Yeah, totally.
And you get stuck at the pen. Okay, so what's next? You know, that whole, you know, and being with the children all day like that, you know, can be tiresome for some people, I guess, but it's just such gold.
Yeah, I found the more remote people, lockdown didn't mean anything to them at all, really, unless they were quite a bit elderly, that clipped their wings a bit. And another one was, I did have a couple of my clients who became very ill, were diagnosed with really dreadful diseases right on lockdown, and that made things very difficult for them. a lot more. I mean, it was going to be difficult anyway, but a lot more difficult. But apart from that, yeah, mostly people just got on with it.
As farmers and
As farmers do.
farmers and everyone do, I guess. Yeah. Oh wow. Well, honestly, would love to just keep chatting, and we will reach out to you both again when we start running some of our focus groups and workshops, and would love for you to be involved. But thank you both so much for your time today. It's been a golden conversation. Briar and I, I'm sure we will, our minds are blown, and we will talk for hours about this afterwards as well. So thank you so much for both virtually joining us and joining us in person. And yeah, all the best. And
Not that scary at all.
Thank you so much, everyone.
All right, thank you.
awesome.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.